In most countries, the process of making and presenting the budget is a mundane, regular affair. The pomp and show is, in a sense, unique to India, where the finance minister gives a budget speech instead of just putting out the budget document in parliament. The reason for this is the Indian budget is as much a political statement, a vision document, and an accomplishment report of the government, all rolled into one, as much as it is an account of the country's revenue and expenditure. This year's budget is even more important. The tone was set by the Prime Minister at the start of the budget session, who said all eyes are on India's budget in light of global recessionary trends. Listen in.
भारत के बजट के तरफ न सिर्फ भारत का लेकिन पूरे विश्व का ध्यान है। डावाडोल विश्व की आर्थिक परिस्थिति में भारत का बजट भारत के सामान्य मानवी की आशा आकांक्षाओं को तो पूरा करने का प्रयास करेगा ही, लेकिन विश्व जो आशा की किरण देख रहा है उसे वो और अधिक प्रकाशमान नजर आए। मुझे पूरा भरोसा है निर्मला जी इन अपेक्षाओं को पूर्ण करने के लिए भरपूर प्रयास करेगी।
Economic Survey 2022-23 highlights, I propose to provide that any income from transfer of any virtual digital asset shall be taxed at the rate of 30%. We plan to steer a paradigm change. A high-level committee of reputed urban planners, urban economists, and institutions will be formed to make recommendations on urban sector policies.
Complicated, right? Well, most union budgets are. The finance minister speaks for hours, announcing new schemes and allocating money. He or she talks about tax slabs and social security schemes. But how many of us really understand what that means? Most of the budget nuances are lost in financial jargon. But don't worry, we've got you covered. For ordinary, hard-working citizens of this country, the budget really boils down to one thing. Will I have more money in my pocket or not? Which means taxes. The rumor is Nirmala Sitharaman will change the tax slabs. Slabs are basically income brackets which have different taxation rates. For example, if you earn between 2.5 to 5 lakh rupees, your tax rate is 5%. If you earn between 5 and 7.5 lakh rupees, your tax rate is 10%. The higher your income, the higher your tax. The finance minister could increase the basic exemption limit from 2.5 lakh to 5 lakh rupees, which means no tax for people who earn less than 5 lakh. Good news if you fall in that bracket. Equally important is customs duty. The finance minister is said to have drawn up a list of items which could soon become expensive to import. Don't worry, the list doesn't include your everyday items. The duty on things like jewelry, high-end electronic goods and plastic goods are expected to be increased. Higher customs duty equals higher cost in the market. The government faces a tough balancing act in Parliament. On the one hand, it's their last full budget before elections in 2024, so populism would be the politically savvy choice. But as they say, good politics is bad economics. Considering the global economic outlook, a fiscally prudent budget is the need of the hour. As for ordinary citizens, just watch out for the taxes and customs duties.
All right, today we're going to focus on what young India wants from the budget. We have some data to go by. The economic survey is out. It says India will grow between 6 to 6.8% in the next year. The IMF has kept its outlook for India's growth at about 6.1% for next year, but there is no denying that it's going to be tough times ahead. What do we expect from the budget to really give people, the Aam Aadmi and the Aam Aurat, what they need? To speak on this, I'm joined today by Vineeta Singh, co-founder and CEO of Sugar Cosmetics, Viren Prasad Shetty, Executive Vice Chairman of Narayana Health, Sakshi Gupta, Senior Economist of HDFC, and Gagan Kumar, tax expert, are all joining me on the show. Welcome to all of you, and great to have you on this special on Mirror Now. Vineeta, let me begin, with your take. We've talked about why this is going to be a budget which needs to boost consumer spend. As someone who runs a successful business, is that the key to keep that consumption up?
Firstly, thanks, Tamanna, for referencing the Aam Aurats, or our consumers are Aam Aurats. So I'm very grateful that you referred to them. So yes, one of the biggest challenges for all consumer businesses is going to be if the demand in India, which has outstripped the demand in all other economies, is going to continue. And I do hope that there are certain incentives to push demand up, and especially rural, semi-urban, this is going to look like a challenge. So I do hope that we do see some benefits in the income tax slabs. Hopefully the 10 lakh slab, which has stayed like that, the highest one, can go up to about 15 to 20 lakhs. I hope there are more capex spends to spur some demand in, and it is otherwise the inflation is going to lead to more depressed demand over the next 12 months.
Okay, so we need more capital expenditure from the government that will, spur on demand. The other thing that the government should do, probably, everyone's hoping will do, is ease up on taxes. Let me come to Gagan Kumar on this question. Everyone's talking about whether there will be tax breaks for the middle class. Frankly, we do it every year, and it hasn't happened for the last several years. With a 6.4% fiscal deficit, is this one of those pipe dreams that, we routinely talk about before the budget?
Well, we do talk about it every year, undoubtedly, but considering the inflationary trend which we are witnessing and the global crisis all across the world, I don't think that there would be much of the tinkering in the personal tax slab rate. Having said that, just for a moment, you talked about the data, and if we talk about the youth in our country, about 33 crore of our youth falls within the age bracket of 15 to 29, and about 25% of our population is between the age of 0 to 14. So the finance minister time and again has indicated that this year's budget is going to lay down path for the next 25 years. Meaning thereby the budget document is likely to address the aspiration of this segment of youth, which is going to be the driving force in the next 25-30 years.
Right.
Now, as far as taxes are concerned, and Vineeta ji is also on the panel, that there's an ecosystem which is being developed for the startup. And in my view, what I would want as a demand from the youngster side is that there ought to be certain policy modifications with regard to the handling of startup. And one of the crucial aspects is decriminalization of certain fiscal and regulatory laws. So assuming if there is a delay of 1 day deposit in TDS, that should not lead to a prosecution. Because if a youngster is trying to set up a new business, he is bound to fall in his initial days. He may not have the wherewithal to have a huge compliance team to take care of all those aspects.
Especially now when funding has become tougher, compliance will become tougher. Especially now, Mr. Kumar.
Yes. So compliance in a way is becoming an entry barrier, because if compliance cost is too high, the youngster would be discouraged from setting up his own business because it's a cost center for him. So I think these are the areas where government must address these things. We have taken a great step in terms of education policy, because our education policy has been in a way where we were creating more babus. I think the time has come that the education system must orient itself to develop businessmen or businesswomen instead of babus. So, with those initial comments, I think this is what the youth would aspire from the finance minister tomorrow.
Yes, and I'm glad I talked about the Aam Aurat. Mr. Gagan Kumar talked about business women. We have a 50-50 representation on this panel, and that's important to remember. We have a female president, a female finance minister. So we need to keep that in mind. But at the end of the day, all of that looks great. We'll still have to ask whether this is going to be the budget for the young India. The positioning is that it's the budget for Amrit Kal. What does that really mean? Viren, I want to come to you on the question of healthcare. The 2021 budget got a lot of attention on healthcare. To some extent on 2022, we're still coming out of pandemic. Now, the economic survey today says that the government spent 2.1% of GDP on healthcare in FY23. That's still lesser than, about the 3% target, but it's supposed to be an improvement. The economic survey also says that out-of-pocket expenses for the average Indian has come down. Is that something you're seeing? What do you think needs to be the push for adequate, affordable, and quality healthcare for the average Indian?
See, it has improved a lot, from 1.5% to 2% of the allocation on healthcare, but it can be 10%, it can be 20%. It's still not going to guarantee universal affordability. It's not so much how much you allocate on a budgetary statement, it is how it gets spent. And in that, I would speak for maybe our sector and most sectors, the level of accountability, the kinds of things that money from the government gets spent on, the way in which one does an accounting of the cost versus the impact and the benefits and how it flows in through the common man tends to get lost out. But that's a much larger macro issue, and there are things that go beyond this budget that should address fiscal responsibility. But if you'd ask about how we address affordability, there are things that are done in different parts of the world to encourage, let's say, increased insurance penetration by giving tax breaks for that, or creating tax-advantaged health savings account. The money that you save for healthcare need not be taxed because it's taxed twice anyway. So there are things that can be done to encourage a culture of people saving more for their retirement, for their savings, for their insurance. Healthcare should also be treated the same. If it happens, great. If it doesn't, maybe next year.
I like the idea that you've talked about saving and increasing savings for the middle class, for the average Indian, especially in this year. Sakshi Gupta, the fear of inflation, the fear of job losses, and the fear of, not enough income increase. How do you think the budget should address all of these issues when we know that growth is going to slow down and is likely to slow down compared to the current fiscal?
Right. Tamanna, first of all, thank you for having me on this show. I think this budget has a very tough task ahead of itself, right? As you said, we are looking at 2023, where there's going to be a global growth slowdown, and that has implications and headwinds for India as well, right? But on the other hand, I think what's also important to remember is that the budget is looking at fiscal consolidation. So we have a huge pile of debt that the government also needs to worry about, right? So in terms of really, trying to address the problem of employment, inflation, and overall growth and incomes, I think that this, the government has continued to focus on a strategy where they are looking at spending higher amounts on capital infrastructure, capital spending in roads, railways, highways, which in itself are employment generating, right? So there are multiplier effects that flow through the economy and create great job opportunities as well as income. Secondly, I think that this whole focus on, digital India, the startup ecosystem is extremely crucial at this stage. Because, and this is something that the economic survey also talks about, that this whole infrastructure that we build on the digital front will help us reach, 7 to 8 plus growth for India over the medium term, right? So I think, for instance, for employment or education, I think that a focus towards schemes that utilize the digital space, for education in rural areas, etc. These are certain things I think that the budget could focus on and kind of, support employment, education in general. The last point I really want to make is that, we are looking at India is witnessing this population boom now, right? We are the youngest country in the world. And about 48% of our population is women, right? So I think creating an element of inclusivity in the policies that you come out with is becoming more and more important. Currently, I think women-centric programs or schemes only account for about 0.6% of India's GDP, which I think is very low.
Right.
Yeah, so I think that's something
increasing the labor force participation for women to 50% is a stated goal by 2047. I don't know if we should be waiting that long. Vineeta, you want to come in on this? What inputs do you have to overall increase the participation of women as well as boost employment at a time when we have discovered, thanks to the pandemic, remote working as option?
Yeah. So definitely this is an urgent, 50% is a huge aspiration. We're at under 20% right now, but even a 10% increase in participation of women in workforce can have an $800 billion GDP impact as per McKinsey's report. So I think this is a very urgent initiative for the government. And one of the things, like Sakshi mentioned, is that, the biggest challenge for women is entrepreneurs is access to capital. Less than 2% of capital, equity capital, gets deployed to women entrepreneurs. So far, there haven't been debt schemes that the government has introduced, which are, have a decent 1, 2, 3 crore kind of cap that solve this capital issue for women entrepreneurs. And it is a given statistics that women-led businesses employ more women. So I feel that some of these initiatives, if women are not going to get access to equity capital, then can the government
employ more women than your counterparts?
Yes, absolutely.
Or as a proportion of your base?
70% of women at Sugar, and that's across the board for women-led companies. Yeah. And the other thing, of course, I feel that for employment creation would be incentivizing private companies to set up manufacturing in India in a bigger way. I feel that for us, we're still able to manufacture about 45% in India, but we want to manufacture 100%, and some incentive there can be to employment. The other thing, I think, from startups, since Gagan mentioned about startups, I want to add is that, if we saying that last year 3% of GDP came from the new economy and we wanted to go to 4 to 5%, then the taxation, especially around ESOPs, which impacts both men and women working in startups, has to come, become world class. Currently, ESOP is the only thing which is in India is taxed doubly at the time of exercising as well as at the time of selling. Nowhere in the world ESOP is taxed at the time of exercising. So I feel that, just government coming in, supporting the startup ecosystem by making the ESOP policy more employee friendly, improving the tax structures for LTCG to be at par with listed companies can again make a huge difference.
The ESOP demand again is another one hanging fire for at least the last, I think, 4 budgets, if not more. So the government has done a lot to push startups, but they're not budging on the ESOPs. At the end of the day, Viren, the question is that should the government, in a year of fiscal consolidation, when you're sitting with 6.4% deficit, be spending on incentivizing business, and in what way? We know PLI is the buzzword right now. Do you think that's important, especially when they're talking about areas like APIs or becoming more Atmanirbhar in the pharmaceutical space?
See, industrial policy and the ways in which you choose to give certain tax advantage to certain industries will always be a game of who can pull the right political strings. Now, if you want to broad base the access to employment, you want to increase female labor force participation, there are other much simpler things you can do that don't necessarily involve giving massive tax advantages. And to be honest, there's very little evidence that ever goes to show that creating these SEZ and tax-free zones are the primary consideration for when large companies decide whether or not they set up factories, manufacturing, finishing goods, IT parks, or so on. The biggest thing for them is access to educated labor, access to foreign markets, the free flow of intellectual property, free flow of capital. Those are things that are, systemic bottlenecks that should be addressed. It doesn't cost you much money. Bribing foreigners to come and set up in India is, at least my personal opinion, is not the best ways in which we build a industrial base.
Okay, so let's come back to our focus on the show, which is for the average Indian, for the youth, and how they can look at this budget as a game changer, because you're also setting the stage for India to be resilient, to continue to be resilient when there are tough times globally. Some of the major economies of the world are going to go into a recession, possibly. India has to focus on domestic consumption. Mr. Gagan Kumar, since the focus on domestic consumption is so high, and the economic survey talks about it, the reason that they're so optimistic is because consumption has been great last quarter, better than since several years. Will that continue is the question, and how do you incentivize it? Do you think that we need to relook at the tax structure right now to continue to incentivize consumption?
I would put it slightly different. As I said in the beginning, that our median age is about 28 years, meaning thereby that we have a aspirational youth in the country. I'll give you an example. Even son or daughter of a maid servant in your home would be driving a motorcycle worth 100,000, that is 1 lakh rupees. So the consumption is not an issue as long as we have an aspirational youth, because the advantage of youth is that it has aspiration as well as consumption. Now, I think we need a paradigm shift in our thought process. We call something luxury goods as a sin product. I think that socialist thought process need to be left behind. There is nothing wrong if a youngster who is a fresh law graduate or a fresh management trainee from IIM would like to buy a Mercedes. Why would a higher rate of GST be applicable on that as compared to a smaller vehicle? So I think tax structure to that effect, although GST is not a subject matter of
but by the way, GST is applicable at the highest rate on most vehicles. You don't even need to go up to a Mercedes. On most four-wheelers would get the highest rate of GST. Mercedes is now next level.
Yeah, so I'm just trying to make a case on the aspirational point of view. So the idea is that if these products will ultimately get manufactured in India, the job will be created, the youth will maintain its aspiration, consumption will also be maintained. Someone talked about the pitfalls of globalization. Yes, we are witnessing it. Mahatma Gandhi said that Bharat gaon mein basta hai. The village economy is the focus. We are seeing how Joshi Math is collapsing. All this is a collective effort of this globalization which is not sustainable. So Atmanirbhar is the only way out if we want to have a sustainable economy. So for this reason also, it's high time that the consumption, the focus be shifted on youth. As a result, the consumption will be maintained. As a result, the manufacturing and the local supply chain ought to be augmented. And thereby, to that effect, the tax rates, both direct and indirect taxes, have to be tweaked to make it a reality.
Well, if you're talking about the youth, the one big aspiration and one pressing need is good quality jobs. Sakshi Gupta, let me come to you on this. There is a lot of back and forth on employment numbers and how to calculate employment numbers, what parameter, what survey you should do and should take. But there's no doubt that good quality, I wouldn't even say stable, well-paying jobs are a scarcity in this country. It's not easy to find, and that's why there's such a hankering after government jobs which are seen as safe. How can this be changed?
Right. Tamanna, there are two aspects to the job problem in India, right? One is that as you said, there are no good quality jobs, right? Or high skilled jobs in India, not enough, right? So if you have 13 million youth joining the workforce every year, you do not have 13 million jobs that are, available each year. I think to address this problem, there clearly needs to be a focus towards, high-end manufacturing. There needs to be a push towards services, which generally tend to give you, higher paying or higher skilled jobs. So I think that from the supply perspective, we need to move to an ecosystem where there is greater focus towards both services and high-end manufacturing. Right? So that is point number one. The second is that even for the jobs that are available, I think the skilling is not up to the mark, right? So you have the national education policy that was introduced in India, but I think the implementation of this and allocations towards the scheme, and not just focusing on vocational training, but now trying to prepare for the future where big data, machine learning, AI, I mean, these are, trends that are coming up globally as well as in India. So I think our institutional capacity in education now needs to be enhanced, and there needs to be, focused policies towards this area. I think both these aspects need to kind of improve for you to really solve the employment or the job issue.
So quality of jobs, definitely one concern. Increasing incomes or at least securing incomes, another concern. I cannot wrap up this conversation without the traditional budget wish list. I have to ask all of you the top, points that you hope to see in the budget. Viren, let me begin with you.
Well, it has nothing to do with my sector. I would say if they want to increase the tax base, they should start taxing land. It is a giant sink of black money in this country, and there are barely enough taxes earned by municipalities across the country. The roads are crumbling, the sewage system is non-existent. I live in Bangalore, the drainage system is quite bad here, and property taxes are simply not enough to cover that. And whereas you have a lot of people sitting on large land banks and paying almost next to nothing on that tax land ownership, and you don't need to start tweaking with the personal income tax or start looking at other indirect ways of making money. And people that own large plots of land, I think they can afford to pay it.
Okay. Do you want to come in on that, Vineeta? What's on your budget wish list? You talked about, easing taxation on ESOPs, but apart from that?
Yes, unlike Viren, I'm very selfish, so I'm going to talk about my sector. I definitely hope there are some benefits at the higher or lower end in income tax to spur demand. And secondly, overall, a switch in approach to startups in terms of ease of doing business, as well as better taxation norms, because that's where the jobs will come from.
Yeah. Sakshi?
So I would say, I think that at a macro level, given that they are going to be looking at fiscal consolidation, my wish list would be that they do not compromise on the focus on capital expenditure, and infrastructure spending is required, and that continues to remain the focus. Secondly, I would, wish that there is enough focus on the rural sector. We haven't seen a huge recovery in the rural segment, and rural consumers still continue to reel under the pressure of the, pandemic effect. So these are the two things that I would hope for in the budget.
Gagan Kumar, what are you hoping to see? And I'm not asking what is likely or what you think is likely to come, but wishes have no barriers. So what would you like to see?
Absolutely. So I really look forward to one day to have ease of doing business going to the next level, which would require a major administrative reforms, not only the tax administration, but generally in administration reform. And secondly, from a tax and regulatory perspective, decriminalization of minor offenses.
Absolutely. Long way to go, very long wish list, but I think the focus this time round is going to be resilience and keeping the ship steady in troubled waters. Thank you so much to all of you for joining us today.